I had gotten good at hiding things. The makeup over my cheekbone, the long sleeves in July, the polite smile I wore like armor. To most people at the diner, I was just Olivia, the quiet waitress who brought their coffee without spilling a drop. But that morning, the makeup had cracked. I was wiping down a booth in the corner when I heard the bell above the door jingle. A man stepped in tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a faded flannel shirt and jeans dusty from the road. His presence seemed to fill the tiny place like a thundercloud rolling in. I kept my head down. I'd learned not to make eye contact with men like him. "Morning," he said to no one in particular. His voice was deep, steady, like the sound of distant thunder. I nodded and reached for the coffee pot. When I set the cup in front of him, my sleeve slipped just an inch too far. "Thanks," he murmured. Then his eyes caught on my wrist. The bruise wasn't fresh anymore, but it was ugly. A dark smudge where Liam's fingers had dug in too hard 2 nights ago. I yanked the sleeve back down, heat rushing to my cheeks. "You okay?" he asked softly. Not the casual way strangers do, but with a quiet weight that made my stomach twist. "Yes," I lied. My voice came out too fast, too bright. Just a clumsy moment with the freezer door. He didn't argue, just studied me with those gray eyes for a moment longer, as if deciding whether to press. Then he reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small card. "If you ever need a hand," he said, sliding it across the counter. No strings attached. I stared at the card after he left. It only had a name, Mason Carter, and a phone number written in neat block letters. For a moment, I almost laughed. Help. From a stranger I had stopped believing in that years ago. I crumpled the card in my palm and shoved it into my apron pocket, but the words stuck in my mind like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I thought I'd forget him by the time my shift ended, but that night, staring at the ceiling of our apartment, I couldn't stop seeing his eyes. Steady, quiet, unafraid. The eyes of a man who noticed what everyone else ignored. I thought if I moved fast enough, he wouldn't notice. If I kept my sleeves pulled down my face, calm my hands steady, I could pass as a normal waitress on a normal Tuesday. But Mason Carter wasn't like the other men who came into the diner. The kind who kept their eyes glued to a phone or the sports highlights on the wall TV. He didn't stare at me the way Liam's friends did either. His gaze was still, heavy in a way that wasn't threatening, but made me feel stripped bare. When he asked if I was okay, I forced out a laugh. "Really, I'm fine. Just clumsy." The freezer door got me pretty good. He didn't nod, didn't smile. He just looked at me with those quiet gray eyes, and I had the insane urge to blurt out everything. Every bruise, every word Liam had hurled at me like a weapon. Instead, I tightened my grip at the coffee pot until my knuckles went white. "Accidents happen," I added. For a second, I thought he might say more, but Mason only reached into his back pocket and pulled out a small rectangle of thick paper. He placed it gently on the counter, as if he didn't want to spook me. "Take this," he said. "If you ever decide you're done with freezer doors." There was no sarcasm in his tone, no judgment, just that same steady calm. I glanced down. A simple business card, Mason Carter, and beneath it a phone number written in bold, confident handwriting. My throat felt tight. "You don't have to take it," he interrupted softly. "But you could." Then he slid his coffee cup forward, dropped a $5 bill beside it, and stood to leave. As the bell above the door jingled behind him, I stared at the card. My fingers itched to shove it into the trash, but instead, I slipped it into my apron pocket. All shift long, I felt its weight, like a burning coal against my side. And that night, back at the apartment, I laid awake staring at the water-stained ceiling. Liam snored beside me, reeking of whiskey. My fingers brushed the card. I hadn't meant to bring it home. Mason Carter. His voice echoed in my mind, calm, unrushed, like he didn't doubt for a second that if I wanted out, I could take his hand. But he didn't know Liam. Didn't know the way his anger flared without warning, how he apologized with flowers the next day, only to grab harder the next time. I curled tighter under the thin blanket, the business card pressed to my chest. "It's just a piece of paper," I whispered into the dark. "He doesn't mean it." No one ever means it, but a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered something I wasn't ready to hear. What if he does? I could always tell what kind of night it would be by the way Derek's truck sat in the driveway. If it was parked straight, wheels aligned perfectly with the cracks in the concrete, he'd be in a decent mood. Tired, maybe quiet. But tonight, the front wheels were turned sharp, like he'd yanked the key out mid-spin. My stomach sank. I pulled my jacket tighter as I walked up the creaking steps of our mobile home. The air inside was thick, heavy with the smell of fried food and stale beer. "You're late." His voice came from the couch, low and flat. I froze for half a beat before forcing a smile. We got slammed at the diner. A bus group came in right before close. Derek turned his head, eyes bloodshot from God knows how many drinks. He was still in his mechanic's overalls, grease smudged across one cheek. "Slamming tables doesn't fill the jar much, huh?" His gaze flicked to the tip money clutched in my hand. "It's not bad," I said softly. "Enough for groceries." He snorted. "Groceries. Yeah. And how many of those dollars came from you smiling too wide at lonely truckers?" I stiffened. "I don't act sweet. Don't lean over the counter just enough so they see what they're paying for." His words cut like glass. "Derek, please," I whispered. "I'm tired." He pushed himself off the couch in one fluid motion, moving closer. "You think I don't see it? The way they look at you." His hand shot out, fingers brushing my sleeve, where Mason's card still hid in my pocket. I stepped back, heart pounding. "You're imagining things," I said quickly. For a moment his jaw worked, teeth grinding. Then he let out a sharp laugh. "Yeah, maybe I am. But don't forget Olivia. I pulled you out of nothing. Out of a ratty little trailer park in El Paso. You wouldn't have a roof without me." I swallowed hard, the words like ash in my mouth. "Yes." I know, I murmured. That seemed to calm him. He ran a hand through his hair and slumped back onto the couch, grabbing the remote. "Go to bed. And don't forget my brother's coming over tomorrow. Make something decent for dinner." "Yes, Derek." I slipped into the bedroom and shut the door gently behind me. The weight of Mason's card burned in my pocket. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor, repeating Derek's words in my head, until they became a chant. "You wouldn't have a roof. You wouldn't have a roof." But deep down, another voice whispered something I didn't want to hear. "You wouldn't have bruises either. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I thought coming to America would be the start of everything good. I imagined small apartments with peeling paint that still smelled like freedom minimum wage jobs, that felt like stepping stones, and a man who would protect me from all the darkness I'd left behind. But dreams don't come true just because you cross a border. I met Derek at a bus station in El Paso, my backpack torn at the straps, and my English broken. He smiled at me like I mattered, bought me a coffee, promised a fresh start in Texas, a place where no one would know my name or my past. At first, he was kind. He called me his sweet girl and kissed the palms of my hands like I was made of porcelain. He gave me a trailer to live in, a job at his cousin's diner, and rules. So many rules. No phones, No friends outside work. No walking home alone. No makeup unless he said so. By the time the rules became insults, and the insults became bruises, I was already trapped. I didn't have papers. I didn't have money. And I didn't have anyone who would believe me if I screamed. The door creaked open behind me. Olivia. I flinched and turned, finding Derek leaning against the frame. He had a beer in one hand, and a hard look in his eyes. "What's in your pocket?" My breath caught. Nothing, I said quickly. "Just tips. Show me." "It's nothing." He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing my arm. His fingers dug into my skin right over the bruise Mason had noticed earlier. "You're hiding something," he growled. "I'm not." His free hand yanked my apron pocket inside out. A small, white rectangle fluttered to the floor between us. Derek bent down, slowly lifting the card between 2 fingers, like it was poisonous. Mason Carter. He read aloud. And a phone number. His smile was thin, sharp as a knife. "You think you're clever? It's not shut up." The words were ice. He stepped closer until I could smell the beer on his breath. "You planning to run off with some stranger, huh? You think he's gonna save you?" "No," I cried. He gave it to me at the diner. I didn't ask for it." Derek laughed. The sound sent a chill down my spine. "You ungrateful little thing. I gave you a roof food, a life. And this is how you repay me." He shoved the card into his back pocket. "You're not going anywhere, Olivia. Ever." I nodded, too scared to speak. He finally let go of my arm and stormed out, slamming the door so hard, the picture frame above the bed rattled. I sank onto the mattress, clutching my wrist. It didn't matter that the door had a lock. Fear doesn't need one. In this house, I wasn't free. And for the first time, I wasn't sure if I ever would be. The dizziness came out of nowhere. One moment I was pouring coffee for a table of truckers, the next, I had to grip the counter to stop myself from swaying. "You okay?" Leave asked Maria, the other waitress, glancing at me with mild concern. "Yeah. Just stood up too fast," I lied. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. For days now, I'd been fighting waves of nausea every morning. My back ached in a way that felt different. And my cycle, I swallowed hard. I couldn't even remember the last time. At the end of my shift, I slipped 3 crumpled bills from my apron pocket, careful to keep my back to Maria and the cook. I'd been hiding small amounts of tip money behind a loose floorboard in our bedroom for months. Just enough for emergencies. I didn't know if this counted as one, but it felt like it did. At the corner pharmacy, I kept my head down, praying no one from the diner would see me. The cashier barely glanced up as he rang me up. "Have a good night," he said, as I tucked the small white bag deep into my purse. The air outside felt thick, heavy as I walked home. Every step my mind screamed, "It's nothing. It's stress. You're overreacting." But another voice whispered, "What if you're not?" In the trailer, Derek was passed out on the couch, snoring. The TV flickered with some late-night infomercial. I crept past him into the tiny bathroom and locked the door behind me. My hands shook as I tore open the box. 3 minutes, the instructions said. 3 minutes felt like 3 years. I sat on the edge of the tub staring at the linoleum floor, tracing the cracks in the pattern as if they could tell me how my life would break next. When the timer on my phone buzzed, I didn't want to look. But I had to. 2 pink lines. The air left my lungs. My chest tightened until I thought I might pass out. 2 lines. Positive. My first thought wasn't joy. It wasn't even fear. It was Derek. His words echoed in my mind. "You're not going anywhere, Olivia. Ever." And now, he'd be right. I pressed my palm flat against my stomach, already imagining a tiny heartbeat fluttering inside. I wanted to love this baby. I wanted to protect it. But how could I, when I couldn't even protect myself? From the living room, Derek stirred, muttering something in his sleep. I shoved the test deep into the trash can and ran the faucet to drown out the sound of my quiet sobs. In that cramped, peeling bathroom, I curled in on myself and whispered to the baby I wasn't ready for. "I'm sorry. I don't know how to save us." But a tiny voice in my head reminded me of a business card, long since taken from me, and a man with steady gray eyes who'd said, "If you ever need a hand." I hadn't planned on telling him. I thought maybe I could keep it quiet at least for a little while, as I figured out what to do. But morning sickness doesn't wait for plans. That day, I barely made it to the bathroom in time. I retched so loudly the sound carried down the hallway. The door slammed open and Derek's voice boomed behind me. "What the hell is wrong with you?" I wiped my mouth with shaking hands, forcing myself to stand. I think I'm pregnant." The words came out like a confession, fragile and broken. For a moment there was silence. His expression was unreadable. Then his lips curled into a smile. Not the warm kind, but sharp and cold. "Pregnant," he repeated, drawing the word out like he was tasting it. I knotted my fingers, gripping the edge of the sink so hard my knuckles turned white. "Well, isn't that perfect?" he said. "Now you'll never leave me." The room seemed to tilt. I wasn't planning to. He took a step closer, cutting me off. "You weren't planning to run off with that Mason guy? Call the number you've been hiding from me." I froze. "You thought I didn't see you tucking his card into your apron. You're not as clever as you think, Olivia." My mouth went dry. "I wasn't going to call him," I whispered. "Good." His voice dropped low, almost gentle, but his eyes were lit with something dangerous. "Because you're mine. And that baby, that's mine too." He brushed past me, opening the cabinet to grab a beer. "You should be thanking me," he said casually. "You'd be nothing without me. Now you've got a home, a man, and soon a family." I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand there rooted in place like a trapped animal. Instead, I whispered, "Please don't hurt me." He turned beer bottle in hand and laughed. "Hurt you? Why would I do that? You're carrying my kid now. That changes things." But I didn't believe him. Not for a second. That night, I lay awake in bed staring at the cracked ceiling. Derek's arm was draped over my stomach like a chain. His breathing was heavy, almost peaceful, as if he'd already won. And maybe he had. I thought of Mason Carter, of the way his eyes softened when he saw the bruise on my wrist, of the words he'd said as he handed me his card. No strings attached. But Derek had taken that card. He'd taken everything. I pressed my hand against my belly and felt the faintest swell beneath my palm. "I'll protect you," I whispered to the life growing inside me. "Somehow, I'll find a way." But the truth was I didn't know how, because in this house there were no locks on the doors. And yet, I'd never felt so caged. I don't remember making the decision to call him. It wasn't a thought-out plan or a moment of courage. It was survival pure and desperate. Derek had gone out to meet some buddies at the bar. The second his truck roared away, I locked the door behind him, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the bolt. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the cheap cell phone Derek allowed me to use for emergencies only. This was an emergency, wasn't it? The memory of Mason's steady voice played in my mind like a lifeline. "If you ever decide you're done with freezer doors, I didn't have his card anymore. Derek had torn it to pieces and tossed it in the trash days ago, but I'd memorized the number without even realizing it. My fingers hesitated over the keypad. What if he didn't answer? What if this was all a mistake? And then I thought of the baby. I pressed the call button. The line rang once. Twice. Hello? His voice was lower than I remembered, but calm. Solid. I swallowed hard. It's Olivia. From the diner. Silence. I'm sorry, I stammered. I shouldn't have called. Where are you? I froze. I'm still at Derek's place. Is he there? No, not right now. His voice dropped even softer, like he didn't want to scare me. Are you safe? I looked around the tiny trailer, at the lock on the door that felt like tissue paper, at the shadows that seemed to breathe. No. There was no hesitation. Stay there. I'm coming. Mason. Don't argue. The line went dead. I sat there clutching the phone, my pulse hammering in my ears. What had I done? If Derek came back and found Mason here, there'd be no calming him down. But part of me, the part that wasn't completely broken, whispered, "This is your chance." Through the thin walls of the trailer, I heard the rumble of an engine in the distance. Headlights swept across the curtains. I peeked outside and saw a black truck pull up its tires, crunching on the gravel. The door opened. Mason stepped out. Even in the dim glow of the porch light, I could see it. His steady posture, his calm eyes scanning the yard. He wasn't afraid. And for the first time in years, neither was I. The sound of Derek's truck coming up the gravel drive hit me like a thunderclap. He wasn't supposed to be home yet. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding so hard, I thought it might crack my ribs. Mason's truck was still parked out front, his figure barely visible in the shadows. Oh, God. The front door rattled as Derek shoved it open, his boots heavy on the warped linoleum. "Why's the door locked?" he barked. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Just safety. You said you don't lock me out of my own damn house. His eyes darted around the room like a predator sniffing for prey. Then they landed on me, standing rigid, hands clenched in my sweatshirt pocket, and narrowed. "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing. You're jumpy. I'm tired." His face twisted, and I knew that look. The one he got right before the shouting started. "You've been crying," he said coldly. "Why?" Before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. 3 sharp raps. My stomach dropped to the floor. Derek's head snapped toward the sound. Who the hell is that? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. The knock came again, steady, unhurried. Derek stalked toward the door, yanking it open so hard it slammed against the wall. And there he was, Mason Carter. Tall, calm hands loose at his sides, but his eyes burned like steel. "Who are you?" Derek growled. Mason didn't flinch. "I'm here for Olivia." The words hung in the air like a gunshot. Derek laughed low and dangerous. "You've got some balls showing up here, cowboy. She's not going anywhere. She's not your property. She's my fiancée," Derek snapped, jabbing a finger at me. "And she's carrying my kid. You think you can just walk in and take what's mine?" Mason's jaw tightened. "She's not a thing to be owned, and she's not safe here." "Safe?" Derek sneered. "You think you're some hero riding in to save the day." "No," Mason said quietly, "but I'm the man standing between you and her, right now." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Derek's fist shot out. Mason caught it midair, twisting his arm just enough to send Derek stumbling back. "Don't," Mason warned, his voice low, calm and unshakable. "Don't make this worse for yourself." Derek's face flushed red with fury, but he didn't swing again. He wasn't used to anyone standing their ground. Behind Mason, I saw red and blue lights flash across the yard. A sheriff's cruiser pulled up, tires crunching. Mason had called them. He planned this. 2 deputies stepped out, hands resting on their belts. "Evening, folks," one of them said. "We got a call about a domestic disturbance." Derek spun toward me. "You did this." My voice trembled, but I forced the words out anyway. "No, I'm leaving." Mason turned to me, his hand outstretched, and for the first time in years, I took it. The road to the lake was winding and quiet, lined with pine trees that seemed to swallow the sound of Mason's truck. I kept my eyes on the dashboard, hands twisted in my lap. Every mile we put between Derek's trailer and us should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. When the truck finally stopped, I looked up and saw a small cabin nestled near the water's edge. It wasn't fancy, just weathered wood, a sagging porch, and a single light glowing in the window. "This was my uncle's place," Mason said softly. "It's been empty for years. Figured it'd give you some space and peace." I nodded, but didn't move. "Olivia," he said gently, "you can breathe now. You're safe here. Safe." The word sounded foreign, like a language I'd forgotten how to speak. Inside the cabin smelled of cedar and old books. There was a couch with a knitted throw draped over the back, a tiny kitchen with mismatched mugs on a shelf, and a bedroom down the hall with clean sheets. Mason set my duffel bag on the bed. "I'll be out on the porch if you need anything," he said. "But take your time. Rest." I nodded again, too tired to find words. That night, I lay on my side in the unfamiliar bed, staring at the sliver of moonlight on the floorboards. The quiet pressed in from all sides. No shouting. No TV blaring. No heavy boots stomping across the floor. But instead of comfort, it felt suffocating. When Derek yelled, at least I knew what came next. Here, the silence was bottomless, and I didn't know how to fill it. At some point, I slipped out of bed and padded barefoot to the porch. Mason was sitting there in the dark boots, propped on the railing, a steaming mug in his hands. He didn't turn when I opened the screen door. Couldn't sleep. I shook my head. "Me neither," he admitted. "This place, it's too quiet sometimes." I eased into the chair beside him, hugging my knees to my chest. After a long silence, he spoke again. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to, but I want you to know. No one's going to hurt you here." I blinked hard against the sting in my eyes. "Derek used to say that too," I whispered. "At first." "I'm not Derek," Mason said. I risked a glance at him. His jaw was tense, his eyes fixed on the lake. "I know," I said softly. So and the surface of the water rippled under the moonlight, calm and endless. For the first time in years, my shoulders loosened just a fraction. And in that stillness, I wondered what it might feel like to finally truly exhale. The first tear slipped out before I even knew it was coming. I was still sitting on the porch, knees hugged tight to my chest, trying to make myself small. Mason hadn't moved. He just sipped his coffee, staring out at the lake, like he could give me all the time in the world. "I don't know why I'm crying," I whispered finally, my voice cracking. "Because you've been holding it in too long," he said gently. That simple truth shattered something in me. "It wasn't always bad," I said, staring at my bare toes on the wooden boards. "When I met Derek, he was sweet. Or at least he pretended to be. I was 19, scared halfway across the world, and he made me feel like I mattered. Mason didn't interrupt. The first time he hit me, I thought it was my fault. I'd burned the toast. I told myself he was tired, stressed from work. You know, excuses. I laughed, but it came out hollow. And then it kept happening. The yelling, the bruises, the way he made sure I had no one to call, nowhere to go. After a while, you start believing them when they say you can't survive without them. Tears blurred my vision, hot and endless. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I stopped looking in mirrors. For a moment, the only sound was the soft lapping of the lake against the shore. My mom was like you, Mason said quietly. I turned my head sharply. She married young, he continued. My father was charming in public, a monster at home. She hid it well. For years, I didn't even realize what was happening. His voice tightened. I was 12 the first time I saw him raise his hand to her. I froze. Didn't do a damn thing. Mason, you were just a kid, I said softly. Yeah, but the guilt doesn't care about that. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. She finally left when I turned 16. Packed our bags while he was at work and never looked back. Took a strength I don't think I understood until I got older. We sat in silence for a long time. Not uncomfortable, not heavy, just quiet. Finally, Mason spoke again. You leaving Derek. That's strength too. I shook my head. You don't understand. I didn't leave. You came and Olivia. His voice was calm but firm. You called me. You let me help. That's leaving. I let out a shaky breath, the weight in my chest loosening for the first time in years. The stars above the lake seemed sharper now, like someone had polished the night sky. Why are you doing this? I asked, helping me. He met my eyes, then steady and unflinching, because someone has to, and because I couldn't help my mom back then, but I can help you now. For the first time since I'd fled, I believed him. Maybe I really was safe here. The days passed in a quiet rhythm I wasn't used to. Each morning I woke to the sound of birds outside the cabin window, instead of Derek's voice barking orders. And every night I fell asleep to the gentle sway of tree branches and not the creak of his boots pacing the trailer floor. At first, the silence felt strange, almost heavy. But slowly, I started to realize it wasn't silence at all. It was peace. Nag Mason didn't push me to talk or to do anything I wasn't ready for. But he did offer small invitations like pebbles placed gently in my path. Want to help me wash the truck? Can you hand me that wrench? Would you like to join me for coffee on the porch? One afternoon, he showed me an old workbook his mother had used to teach English to immigrants in their church. Thought you might like to brush up, he said softly. No pressure. I hesitated at first, but something in his tone made me open it. We sat at the kitchen table, Mason reading out words like hope, strength, freedom, and I repeated them back, stumbling over the syllables, but smiling anyway. A few days later, I found myself in Mason's small garage, wiping grease off my hands with a rag. You're a fast learner, he said, as I tightened a bolt on the old riding mower. I grinned shyly. I like fixing things. Makes me feel useful again. You've always been useful, Olivia. You just forgot. Those words stayed with me long after I left the garage. For years, Derek made me believe I was nothing without him, that I couldn't survive on my own. But as I stacked firewood by the cabin and practiced new words in the mirror, a thought bloomed quietly in my chest. Maybe I'm not as weak as I thought. That night, as we sat on the porch sipping tea, Mason looked over at me. You're different than the day I found you, he said. Your eyes, they're lighter now. I didn't know how to respond, so I just whispered I feel lighter. Good. He said, his voice low and warm. You deserve to. For the first time, I believed him. The first time Mason saw me clutch my stomach, he froze. It wasn't pain, at least not the kind he feared. It was instinct. A hand drifting protectively over the small life growing inside me. Are you okay? He asked softly. I nodded. Yeah, just thinking. About the baby. Yes. About how I don't know what kind of world I can bring it into. About how scared I am. Mason leaned back in his chair, his steady gray eyes catching the warm glow of the cabin light. You won't have to do it alone, he said simply. At first, I didn't believe him. Not because of Mason, but because promises in my life had always been empty. Derek used to promise me the world, then take it apart piece by piece. But Mason's voice wasn't full of sugar or apologies. It was steady. Sure. I looked down at my hands. You don't even know me. Why would you take this on? I don't have to know everything to know this, he said. No one should have to fight for their life and their child at the same time, and I can stand in that gap for you. His words settled into the quiet like stones dropped into still water. As the days passed, Mason and I found an easy rhythm. He worked at the garage during the mornings, and I cooked small meals, practiced my English with his mother's workbook, and took slow walks by the lake. In the afternoons, he'd teach me little things, how to check the oil in a car, how to chop firewood without splintering it, how to tell a storm was coming just by looking at the clouds. It wasn't romance. Not yet. It was something quieter. A kind of trust I hadn't felt in years. One evening, I was sitting on the porch when he joined me with 2 mugs of tea. Can I ask you something? I said. Sure. Why aren't you married? He gave a small smile. Guess I never found the right person. Or maybe you're too careful, I teased lightly. Maybe. He sipped his tea. But careful isn't always bad. There was a long pause. You're careful with me, I said softly, because you deserve that. Something shifted in the air between us. I looked at him, not the man who had found me trembling in a trailer, but the man who sat here night after night, listening without judgment, offering space without demands. You make it easy to breathe again, I whispered. And you make me want to keep showing up, he said. That night, lying in the small bed, with my hand resting on my stomach, I heard Mason's voice in my mind. You won't have to do it alone. For the first time, I thought maybe it was true. And for the first time, I let myself hope. The sound of tires on gravel made my stomach drop. I peeked through the curtains and saw a familiar truck crawling up the long driveway. Its headlights cut through the pine trees like knives. Derek. My chest tightened. My body remembered before my mind could catch up the sharp words, the hands that grabbed too hard the cage I'd barely escaped. He had found me. You're a Mason. I whispered, my voice barely carrying. He was already at the door, calm but tense. Stay here, Olivia. No, stay inside. He repeated, his tone gentle but firm. This ends here. Through the window, I watched Mason step onto the porch, his shoulders squared against the night, and the truck screeched to a stop. Derek jumped out, his boots crunching on the gravel as he stormed forward. Where is she? He bellowed. Olivia, you think you can run from me? Mason didn't flinch. She's not coming out, he said evenly. Derek's eyes narrowed. Who the hell do you think you are? This is between me and my fiancé. She's not yours, Mason said, and she's not your prisoner anymore. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth, watching from the shadows of the cabin. Bring her out, Derek snarled, or I swear you'll what Mason stepped down from the porch, closing the gap between them. Hit me. Try to drag her back. I'll do whatever it takes. She's carrying my kid. She's carrying a child, Mason said coldly. And that's exactly why you're not getting anywhere near her. The two men stood toe-to-toe in the pale light of the porch. Mason was taller, but Derek had that wild, cornered look that scared me more than his fists ever had. "Walk away," Derek Mason said. "This is your last chance." Derek laughed a sharp, ugly sound. "You don't get it, do you? She needs me. Always has." "Wrong," Mason replied. "You needed her weak, but she's not weak anymore." Gee-eyed for a moment, I thought Derek might lunge, but then he froze, his gaze darting past Mason to the cabin window. To me. Our eyes met. "Olivia." He called, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "You don't have to do this. Come out here and we'll go home. I'll forgive you." My knees buckled, but I didn't move. "I am home," I whispered, though he couldn't hear me. "You leave," Mason said again. His voice was like steel. "Before the sheriff gets here." Derek's face twisted. Then without another word, he turned back to his truck, slamming the door so hard it rattled the frame. The tires spun on the gravel as he sped away into the night. When Mason came back inside, I was still frozen by the window. "It's over," he said softly, but I wasn't sure I believed him. Not yet. The night air felt thick, charged like the moment before a storm breaks. I watched from the cabin window as Derek slammed his truck door and stormed back toward Mason. "You think this is over?" Derek spat, his voice echoing across the yard. "You think a piece of paper can keep me from what's mine?" Mason didn't move. His hands stayed loose at his sides, but there was steel in his voice. "She's not yours. Not anymore." "You're a coward," Derek hissed, "hiding behind cops and lawyers. You think she loves you. She's using you. That baby is mine." Mason's jaw tightened, but his tone didn't waver. "You had your chance to be a man, Derek. You blew it." For a moment, Derek just stood there, his face twisting between rage and desperation. Then his hand twitched toward his waistband like he was reaching for something. That's when red and blue lights flashed at the edge of the trees. Two sheriff's cruisers pulled up fast tires, spitting gravel. Derek froze as deputies jumped out, hands on their holsters. Sir, one of them barked, "Step away from him. Now." "You called them." Derek snarled. "I didn't have to," Mason said calmly. "There's a protective order, and you violated it the second you set foot on this property." The deputy stepped forward. "Mr. Holloway, we warned you what would happen if you came near Ms. Torres again. She's my fiancé. That's my kid," Derek shouted, but his voice cracked now. "Not tonight, it's not," the deputy said. "Turn around, hands behind your back." I pressed a hand to my mouth as they cuffed him. Derek's eyes darted to the window. To me. "You'll regret this, Olivia," he growled. "You think this guy's gonna save you. You'll end up with nothing." But this time his words didn't cut like they used to. For the first time, I didn't believe him. When they hauled him into the cruiser, Mason stayed still, watching until the taillights disappeared down the road. Then he turned and met my gaze through the window. His expression wasn't triumphant. It wasn't angry. It was steady, calm, like he knew this wasn't the end, but he'd stand there as many times as it took. I stepped out onto the porch, my legs trembling. "Is it really over?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Mason said softly. "But even if he comes back, I'll be here." And for the first time since I'd arrived at this cabin, I believed him. Really believed him. The lake looked different now. The same water rippled softly in the breeze. The same pines whispered against the sky. But this morning, with Lily asleep in my arms, everything felt lighter, like the storm had finally passed. It had been a year since that night, the night Mason stood between me and Derek, the night the sheriff's car took him away. In those 12 months, I'd learned the taste of real freedom. No locked doors, no raised voices, no walking on eggshells afraid of which version of Derek I'd get that day. Just mornings like this. The sun warming the porch steps, the smell of cedar and coffee in the air, and Lily, my Lily, breathing softly against my chest. "You're up early," Mason said, stepping onto the porch with 2 mugs in hand. I smiled at him. Not the guarded, half-hearted smiles I used to give. A real one. "Someone woke me up at 5, I said, glancing down at the tiny bundle in my arms. "She's got your stubbornness," Mason teased. "Or yours," I shot back. He handed me a mug. "Thought you might need this." I took a sip, letting the warmth seep into me. For a moment we sat in silence, watching the water shimmer. Then Mason spoke, his voice careful but steady. "You ever think about what's next?" I looked at him, unsure how to answer. I spent so long thinking there wasn't a next, I admitted. Every day felt like survival, like if I could just make it to tomorrow, that would be enough. He nodded, his gray eyes soft. But now, I trailed off, looking at Lily. I think I finally want more than tomorrow. Mason didn't push. He never did. "I'd like that too," he said quietly, "but only if you're ready." I studied his face, the lines around his eyes, the quiet strength in his jaw. Mason wasn't a man of grand gestures. He didn't sweep in like a storybook hero. He'd simply shown up again and again until I started believing he wouldn't leave. I brushed my fingers over Lily's downy hair. "Do you think it's crazy that someone like me, after everything?" He shook his head. "I think someone like you deserves the whole world." And the sun peeked over the treetops, spilling gold across the porch. I leaned my head on Mason's shoulder, and for the first time in my life, I didn't flinch when someone touched me. Because this wasn't a cage. This was home. And in that quiet moment with Mason by my side and Lily sleeping in my arms, I realized what peace really felt like. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the lake in shades of rose and gold. Mason and I sat side by side on the porch swing, its gentle creak, keeping time with Lily's soft breathing in my arms. It felt strange, this quiet. Not the suffocating silence I once knew, but a calm that felt earned like a fragile gift I didn't dare take for granted. I turned to him, studying his profile as he stared out at the water. "Mason, do you ever regret it?" He blinked, surprised. "Regret what?" "Helping me," I whispered. "Getting involved, taking all this on." For a long moment, he didn't answer. My stomach tightened. Maybe he did regret it. Maybe I'd been a burden all this time, and he was too kind to say it out loud. But then Mason turned to me, and there was no hesitation in his voice, not a single moment. The words landed like sunlight on my skin. "You sure?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He smiled softly, a smile that reached his eyes. "You and Lily. You're not a weight, Olivia. You're the best thing that's happened to me in a long time." I looked down at my daughter, Her tiny hand curled against my chest. I keep thinking about how close I was to giving up. I admitted how I almost didn't make that call. But you did. His tone was firm but kind. You saved yourself. I was just lucky enough to answer. The breeze off the lake brushed against my face, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Do you think? I hesitated, then forced the words out. Do you think someone like me could ever deserve this? A real life, a second chance. Mason's expression softened. You don't have to deserve it, he said quietly. You just have to want it. And I see it in you every day, the way you're rebuilding piece by piece. For a long moment, we just sat there in silence. Then Mason reached over, his fingers brushing against mine. You've come a long way, Olivia, he murmured. And wherever you want to go from here, I'll be right here beside you. I let out a shaky breath and squeezed his hand. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of fear lifting, not all at once, but enough to let in something new. Hope. The last rays of sunlight melted into the lake as Mason stood and held out his hand. Come on, he said. Let's get Lily inside before the mosquitoes eat us alive. I slipped my hand into his and let him pull me up. And as we stepped into the warm glow of the cabin, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning of a life worth living.